Is it the mustache? Who knows?
What's up YouTube? We'll be taking a look at the new cards that got revealed today. Now I'm already on the early access server, that means I have access to the new cards in game. All we need to do here is go to PNZ, set the event filter, and we're good to go. Of course, at the forefront of the package we have Jayce himself, who's already kind of been spoiled in that little video. People kind of read most of the card and what it does already. So we have a 4-mana 4/4 that has the optionality to either grant him quick attack or challenger permanently on play. Already pretty well started on its own, and the keywords both have high value, especially if you can choose between them. Elect what you currently need. I also very much like the flavor of the card. It's so close to the original League of Legends champ design. But what makes Jayce really interesting is that, of course, he does give additional support to all of these play expensive spells archetypes. Level up condition, cast 2 6+ cost spells, which means he also levels in deck, and that is very important. And when I level up, create an acceleration gate in hand. Now Jayce on level up of course gets a +1/+1 stat boost, which is then already making him overstated for the mana cost and also considering the keyword. But then again, he also kind of has the karma passive effect, what Karma has when she's enlightened and leveled, but only 4 expensive spells. And also only the first time you cast a 6+ cost spell each round. And the last part that's missing here is the acceleration gate that gets created once Jayce levels up. You get a 6-mana spell that is super highly synergistic with Jayce's leveled passive. Give all of your allies +2/+0 on quick attack, and therefore basically protecting your swing while also empowering it, protecting your units behind that keyword. And the interesting part is that if you double cast it, which is most of the time going to be the case if Jayce is on the board, they get another second keyword. This should be a really strong finisher, especially because there's a decent chance that some of your units get elusive or maybe scout, and especially scout hidden behind a quick attack can be very strong. Great finisher. And Jayce's signature spell also quite synergistic. Shock Blast, 6 mana, deal 3 to 1 enemy or nexus, and deal 3 to another. The cool thing is of course that this champ spell is super useful because when Jayce is already in play, this is exactly the type of card that you'll want to be looking for. And while this card is main deckable on its own and is not ridiculously strong without further support or without further damage buffs, it is a very nice addition to the Jayce package if you keep in mind that you get more payoffs for playing these 6+ cost spells. So with the champ at the head of the package out of the way, I'll go over the other cards. This of course was the most complex one, and then afterwards we can talk a bit about deck ideas and power level and synergies and so on. So Forged Chief, 1 mana 2/1. When I strike, I refill 1 spell mana. This kind of immediately reminded me of Shell Shocker. I feel like it's a slightly worse version of Shell Shocker because you will be in situations where you will already have 3 spell mana and you overflow. You can get this unit pinged by a Valfeast or AoE effects, which means you don't regain that 1 mana that you spend. So the card on its own is okay, it's above average, but I don't think it'll see a lot of competitive play. It is nice though to have another tool in this region in PNZ that amplifies the spell archetype, the expensive spell archetype especially. So maybe it will find a niche in some decks, but I don't think this is gonna be main decked too much. Now, a card that I do think is going to see a lot of play, one of the stronger cards in this expansion most likely will be Pharaoh's Financier. Oh, I'm saying that correctly. If you play this, you manifest a 6+ cost spell from your regions. Of course, this is very close to Conchologist, except that the cards that this generates provide a lot more value. And I think my immediate reaction was that on paper it should be better than Conchologist. And of course, Conchologist is a top tier card, sees a lot of play competitively and in just about any deck. But of course, Conchologist also has the added benefit that the card pools are usually incredibly good. So the Bandit City cheap spells are pretty strong. And for example, if you pair it with Noxus, you get more access to insanely strong cheap spells. Now with the Financier, there's a bit more of an issue that a lot of the high cost spells in this game are honestly a bit garbage. So it can definitely happen that you do find 3 options that are not all that great. Nonetheless, even though they will be overpriced and not very mana efficient, they will still be a lot of top end value. That means, I mean, you'll most likely be playing mid-rangey archetypes around Jayce, and this is a card that does not lose much tempo. 2 mana 2/2 is not too bad of a stat line, and it replaces itself with a high impact card for the mid or late game, and the most important thing here is that you have the optionality. You can pick a card that is currently suited for your matchup, and in a way that can make this card even better than if it would just draw a card. Now, of course, it will mostly make sense to play this card in a region combo where the regions have a lot of strong, expensive spells. A couple of things that come to mind would be Shadow Isles with stuff like Harrowing or Renation Vengeance and so on. And another one that popped to my head immediately would be something like Freljord, where you can find insane high-value cards like Feel the Rush or War Mother's Call, or you can find finishers like Battle Fury. And of course, it might generally make sense to play some Jayce plus something archetype in a mid-rangey way, protect Jayce with Troll Chance. Although I didn't theory craft too much about that yet, and don't quite have the full idea locked out yet. Alright, we continue with additional tech support, and this one's quite interesting. There aren't a lot of main deckable tech cards, it's only Hextech Handler and Adaptatron, the 1 mana 1/3. But this card actually looks pretty solid. Same stat line as Draven, 3 mana 3/2. A bit squishy and vulnerable on its own, but it has a very easy conditionality to fulfill, and that is just playing one expensive spell, 1/6 plus cost spell, and then the payoff is enormous because it buffs itself. It will then be a 3 mana 4/3 quick attack, which is already pretty solid, and of course potentially buff everything else on the board. So some great Heimerdinger support mainly, and of course it also works with Glorious Evolution, making everything attack. But of course this card will be limited to how good tech decks actually are, how good Heimerdinger decks actually will be, and I am still a bit hesitant. Like, I do have an idea in my head of playing something like Jayce, Heimerdinger, Bandle City maybe, with mini-morphs as some of the 6+ cost spell cards. Could definitely be a concept that could work out with the PNZ early removal and then just outvaluing people in the mid and late game. One thing that does confuse me a bit about this card though is that when exactly does it grant allies everywhere this? Is it on summon? Is it on play? And especially, is it permanent or is it only while this card is on the board? What happens if it dies and gets revived by Mist Call and so on? So this card we definitely need to try out and see how the operations exactly work before we can make a final call on its power level. Moving on, the Forge of Tomorrow may actually be the strongest or one of the strongest cards coming in this package. 3 mana when I'm summoned, I summon a 3/3. So already not really overcosted. When you cast a 6+ cost spell, destroy me and refill your spell mana. So you're, in a way, you're getting a 0 mana 3/3. Of course, you will basically loan your mana away and regain it later, but still this should be a great tool of both putting something onto the board early on and stabilizing to not get overrun, but at the same time flip the game state with those expensive spells pretty soon and not lose too much tempo. This basically discounts your next 6 mana spell in a way, and by 3 mana points, that is pretty darn strong. And this is not the only card that summons Forge Workers. We also have Assembly Line right here, very reminiscent to cards like Remembrance, to cards like Reinforcements or Succession. So basically converting your spell mana into units, which can be nice on early turns. For example, your hand is bricked, skip turn 1, skip turn 2, you can already summon 2 3/3s to catch up with the board on turn 3. So that optionality is actually great to have, and most important of all, of course, are all of the synergies with cards like Jayce, Forge of Tomorrow, as well as potentially Lux, Heimerdinger generating elusive turrets, and so on and so on. So while Assembly Line on its own is not that crazy strong, I mean 6 mana for 6/6 of stats is at this point not even average anymore. It's a bit on the weaker side, but considering all of the synergies in certain deck archetypes, this can definitely be a great enabler and a great flexibility tool, especially for those early turns. Now, the card we skipped here was Pharaoh's Skycruiser. 4 mana 2/4, grant me +2/+0 permanently once you've cast a 6+ cost spell this game. I don't think this card is too great. It reminds me a bit of Slippery Wave Rider, and although that card did look good on paper, not a lot of people ended up playing it. It didn't really find its competitive shells. And especially this, I feel like you would usually want to play this in an aggressive deck, and then you would want that to have more attack and be cheaper to be played earlier, right? So I think it is an interesting tech option maybe in metas that are very infested with tons of elusives, and this would be a decent blocker. But generally speaking, I don't think there's going to be any meta that really allows that to happen and to be a good deck building call, basically. So I think this card is kind of subpar. I can't really see a lot of play. Now, Hextech Anomaly is an interesting one. The card looks rather memey to me. basically whenever it is in your hand, every round or whenever you draw it or create it, it transforms itself into a random 6+ cost spell. Now, one thing that's not mentioned here is this card going to stay focus speed at 6 mana? Then it could be very good, although it would still be very high roll dependent, but I assume it just fully transforms into that card. So for example, Ruination would still be slow speed 9 mana, and in that case it's usually not really worth it. You are better off just main decking that spell instead. I guess a benefit could be that this probably can also roll cards from different regions, but I don't think that upside is even close to enough to actually justify playing this in the main deck. So maybe there'll be some funny combos around this at some point. Right now I'm not really seeing any. Shock Blast, another interesting one. Kind of similar to Assembly Line in a way that it is, on its own, it's not that great of a card. The 6 mana for a total of 6 damage is not that crazy good. But due to the flexibility of the card and of course the synergy with the expensive spell package, stuff like Mageseekers and so on, this should be a good tool, especially because PNZ also really likes that optionality of either using their spells as burn or using their spells as board control and removal. So I'm not sure if Shock Blast is going to be main deck too much. I don't think the card is super competitive, but it could definitely see some play in a full-on spell-driven deck. Now, the last card, and also one of the cards that I personally find the most interesting, is basically Jayce's boat, Albus Pharaoh. Now, this fancy gentleman with a handsome mustache might be slightly understated at 7 mana 6/5, but the quick attack keyword is super valuable on a body like this, because there won't be many units that can even represent a block onto Albus Pharaoh. And besides also drawing Jayce, who, of course, especially when he's leveled, can be a crazy value tool in the late game. Hint, hint, a bit reminiscent of Karma, of course. But Albus Pharaoh on his own has a very strong effect, especially one that PNZ likes, and that is dealing direct damage to the enemy nexus. And this card does make the whole Jayce and big spell archetype a lot more inviting and exciting, because this is definitely a potent finisher, super synergistic with a lot of cards in the whole deck. And I really like that it enables this archetype to actually be mid-rangey and play aggressively and close out games in time, and not necessarily rely on outvaluing your opponent only. Like only finding those big spells that are not that impactful, but eventually outgrinding your opponent with double casting stuff like Assembly Lines or Shock Blast. Albus Pharaoh can just end games quicker, just put a stop to them, and that is going to be very good, especially when facing other combo decks. So this card definitely does make me excited about this whole archetype. About the whole package on its own, I think the cards are all decent, but not necessarily amazing or great, and I'm not sure how many of them will actually see competitive play. Could definitely see Pharaoh's Financier be a bit of a staple in a lot of decks in a similar way as Conchologist is, so especially in controlier decks. I could see Forge of Tomorrow also making some appearances, maybe outside of only that Jayce Lux archetype or stuff like that. And Hextech Handler is a very interesting one, so either it won't see play because techs don't see play, or it will be the reason why techs are good. And especially if more tech support comes in through the next couple of expansions, then this card might definitely be a staple at some point. And talking about decks, the obvious choice right now would of course be Jayce and Lux. Both with the spell synergies, you combine the Mageseeker package with the PNZ package here with Forge Workers and so on. And you will have a very solid mid-range deck with access to a lot of units that can be played through spell mana. Very good for both of your champions to get value off of them. And of course, you also have a very potent finisher and burn options to finish your opponent's nexus in Albus Pharaoh and cards like Shock Blast. Pair that with Lux's lasers and you gain a lot of additional threats that mid-range decks often don't have. The Mageseeker package used to only be board-centric and therefore always struggled against chump blockers and so on. But now that you can just shoot past those chump blockers, basically hit the nexus, burn it directly, I could actually see those type of archetypes maybe be tier 2 or tier 1 decks. Now, I still think they won't be meta definers necessarily, because they'll always have a weakness to aggro and to burn, basically. Because if you need to play cards like Radiant Guardian in that deck, it makes the whole deck a lot less consistent in finishing games in time and so on, and not quite as well balanced. Nonetheless, it's something I'm very excited to try for sure. The other ideas I already mentioned, something like Heimerdinger and Tex, maybe even Heimerdinger and Jayce. And another idea would be to play Jayce in a super duper value oriented deck, maybe even pair him with Karma to have literally infinite access. Have something like Ezreal Karma back in the days, but with Jayce instead, and a card like Albus Pharaoh as a finisher. I'll be honest though, I'm not super convinced by any of my own ideas. So if you have additional deck ideas that you would maybe like to see me build the next couple of days and play and try, feel free to write them in the comments, let me know. I'm always on the lookout for new deck ideas, and especially if they run new cards or spicy cards. And I'm also very interested to read what you guys think about all of these cards. Was any of these like heavily misjudged? Do you think something might be low-key broken? And how competitive do you think Jayce will actually be? How good will he be? I mean, a lot of people will surely play him and try him out, but do you think he will actually be long-term competitively viable? Personally, I don't think the meta will change too much with this expansion. Once people will have had their fun with trying Jayce out, it will probably kind of go back to what it normally was. But also, I can be a bit unimaginative in this one. Maybe there are some crazy decks that I haven't considered yet. Maybe Jayce will find the perfect shell. I'm very excited about it. And that's it for all of the new cards of this expansion. What is now left to do is the new game mode of the expansion. Path of Legends, the PvE mode. I will start playing it right now, but of course you guys will see it in the next video. So see you around until then, take care, and I'd be happy to read about your guys' opinions in the comments.